Well, first I'll say that the genocide in Gaza is a tripartite genocide. US supplies the majority of the weapons. UK supplies the intelligence, and the Israelis get it done. Obviously, Germany has a role as well in terms of arms, but in terms of the logistics and intelligence, Britain leads. Again, this has not been covered at all in the mainstream media, but I started looking at the UK role early on in the genocide because the previous year I'd been to Cyprus on a different story, just about the bases that we have there. We retained 3% of Cyprus after independence in 1960 and turned them into huge airbase in the west and a huge intelligence station in the east. So I started thinking, well, this is a 40-minute flight time from Israel, and it's a joint base effectively with the Americans, not officially, but it is. This is going to be very important to the international effort to support Israel as it destroys Gaza. And then I contacted the Ministry of Defense to say how many planes have gone from Akrotiri. RF Akrotiri is the name of the airbase on Cyprus, the UK one. How many have gone? This was like in November, and they said we can't tell you. So, and when I get told that by a government department, I'm like, well, I need to find that out then. But I'd never really used flight tracker websites before, but then I now know them like the back of my hand because I've just been. But so I started thinking, well, how can I construct that, or how can I find that data without being the Ministry of Defense divulging it? So I started looking on this one particularly. It's called Radar Box, and then Radar Box actually was showing how many planes were going from Akrotiri to Tel Aviv and other bases in Israel. So I totted them up and then went back to the Ministry of Defense and said, well, I'm going to publish an article saying you've sent 34. I can't remember what the actual figure was, but I think it was 34. And they sort of panicked and they were like, what? That's wrong. And I was like, well, if you're not telling me, I'm just going to say this is what I found independently. So they actually reversed course and then said, well, look, we'll tell you that it was 17. So I don't know what Radar Box, whether the Ministry of Defense were lying or Radar Box was, the information wasn't correct. I don't know. But anyway, so I published the article originally, the first article saying 17 flights have gone to Israel. And these were all, by the way, massive military transport flights. They're called A400Ms and C-17s. They're massive. You can put tanks in them, 150 troops. Oh. Yeah, so serious. And then they kept going. Up to January, 48 went. According to the Ministry of Defense figures. Again, I generally don't think they lie because when on specific numbers because they could get caught out. So it's probably true, but it could be more. But anyway, 48 they admitted to by January, and this is, you could put like hundreds, well, thousands of troops on that. You could put a shitload of weapons, and so I was asking what was on those flights, and they were saying medical supplies and moving ministers, and you're sort of like, well, that can't be true. You can't have 48 huge military transport just to take like syringes or I don't know, other medical equipment, and also not many ministers had been. There was like maybe a handful. So that's still an open question, by the way, and no one really talks about that because there's so little information about what those flights had on them. But that should come out at some point, and there needs to be investigations of what all those military transport flights were, and they continued up to the summer actually, more infrequently, but they continued. And then after that, when I was looking at these military transport flights, I started in December. The government announced we're going to start doing spy flights over Gaza, but they didn't announce where they were going from, how long they were going to be in the air, or how frequently. But it came up on Radar Box that they were going from Akrotiri, and they were going basically daily, and they were in Gaza, and sometimes twice a day, and one time 3 times a day, and they were in the air for 5 hours over Gaza, 6 hours in total, but including the flight back and forth, 5 hours over Gaza. And they go up till now. There was one yesterday. There was one the day before. And so you're talking about over 13 months of daily spy flights collecting intelligence for Israel. Thousands of hours of footage. In fact, probably the best record of the genocide that there exists outside of Israel, because and they're not going to give any information which makes them look bad, which means it's a very important historical document, legal document now for the process of accountability which needs to start. But they said this is all to do with hostage rescue. Again, which is semantics, because the Israelis present their whole operation in terms of a hostage rescue. And also the British, in January, soon after they announced the flights, they said we've got 2 hostages in Gaza, one of which was eventually killed, they think, by the Israelis themselves. So we've had 1 there for most of last year and up till now. And so you're talking about daily spy flights, thousands of hours footage for 1 hostage. And this is the plane is called Shadow R1 plane, which is a reconnaissance plane, but its capabilities include target acquisition for military strikes. And a Liberal Democrat Lord asked a parliamentary question of the Ministry of Defence saying, is the intelligence you're sharing with the Israelis being used for military targeting? And they said, we can't tell you, it's too secret. So my belief is that information is being passed to the Israelis and they're using it for all sorts of things that we're not being told about, which again shows how Britain is participating in this. It's not a complicit. It's a part, because if you look at the law, if there's a war crime or a genocide going on and you're passing intelligence which is being used to perpetrate that crime, you are a participant. You're not an accessory. You're not complicit. You are a participant. Plus, the other side of this is it came out in the New York Times last summer that Britain had deployed a spy team inside Israel at the beginning of the genocide. And we don't know how big that is or what departments it involved, but it probably involved MI6, GCHQ, the SAS, and that the Israeli official who leaked that spy squad to the New York Times was quoted as saying, the British spies give us value added to our operations and give us information we cannot provide by ourselves. So again, we need to know what that information is. We need to know how many people were there, because this is participation. Again, it probably was involved in military targeting, and it probably was involved in the ground invasion. There's been that spy squad has never been mentioned in the British mainstream media, which is incredible. And then the other side of that is the SAS, the Special Forces, which is an extremely secret part of the British state. In fact, maybe the most secret part. It's even more than the intelligence agencies. You can't get any information about SAS. But the Sun, it was leaked to the Sun on October 27th, so soon after October 7th, that the SAS had deployed 2 RAF Akrotiri on Cyprus for Gaza operations.
Wow.
They said the person that leaked it said it was for hostage rescue, but again, they say that about everything. But they were, and then the following day on October 28th, a D notice, which is a censorship notice which can be sent out by the UK Ministry of Defence, was sent out to all media saying don't publish any more information about Special Forces, UK Special Forces role in Gaza. The only reason we know about that D notice, because one of the facets of the D notice is you're not allowed to publicise it. The only reason we know is because Socialist Worker received it as well, that small weekly paper, and they publicised it. But since that day, October 28th, we've not had a single word about what UK Special Forces have been doing in Cyprus, in Israel, and potentially Gaza. And they've obviously been, I think that obviously in Israel, there probably some of those transport flights I mentioned were moving SAS to Israel. Probably some of them were involved in a spy team that may still be in Israel. But again, we need to know this. And the legal institutions which are investigating the genocide and war crimes, like the ICC and the ICJ, need to know this information, because there's live legal investigations of the Israelis and their leadership. And you're talking about a hyper secret, powerful UK military unit, which we know was deployed to help them, and yet the ministry, and we know that the Ministry of Defence censored the media from talking about. So my hunch is that they went to Israel and they have had an advisory role from the beginning with the Israelis on their ground invasion. Potentially also could be on the ground in Gaza, because the SAS have been fighting in Yemen, in Somalia, in Syria. For over the past 10 years, there have been 7 covert wars fought by the SAS that we know about. And they've been fighting in all those wars. So that it could be that they were on the ground in Gaza. We don't know. Jeremy Corbyn asked a question in Parliament saying, are there any UK personnel on the ground in Gaza? And they refused to say. So again, these are open questions. And I haven't said this before but we're coming to the end now. So the time to investigate this properly is just starting, really. And I have to say, at the end of this process of 15 months of looking at this, we're scratching the surface. Like, the stuff I've mentioned was me, basically, and others at Declassified, looking at flight tracker websites and publicizing scoops that were had by the New York Times and others. But we haven't had an insider whistleblower. And I think we're scratching the surface of the participation. I think what I've said proves that we are active participants in the genocide, but that's the only bits we've been managed to get from open source and from leaks to official media. So the reality of the UK role, I think, is highly likely to be much, much deeper, extensive, way beyond what I've mentioned. And we are partners. And it's the same with the United States. But the United States, everyone kind of knows that. Again, it was leaked in the New York Times that the special forces had deployed to Israel early on. And in fact, there was even a photo op that Biden posted and then deleted of him with. So, but the UK side, people don't think that we've had that role, but we have. And again, the reason that it's not talked about is because the mainstream media has done nothing, which is something I'm used to, but it has been quite shocking. Because when you've got arrest warrants out for the Prime Minister and the former Defence Minister, when you've got a genocide investigation at the World Court, and you're talking about our military and our intelligence services being active participants, that's something you think would have to interest journalists but there's such a conformity of thought and such a subservience to power. It's almost like Soviet Russia or something, without the disciplining mechanism, without any punitive threats. Like, you might lose your job, I guess, if you do, but there's no one saying you're going to be put in prison if you publish an article about the reality of it. Which I think, in the end of the day, it makes them complicit in what's happened. Because the only reason Labour suspended their 30 arms licences, which was window dressing, because it didn't include the parts for the F-35.
Yeah. It's only 8%.
Yes, 8% of licenses, and the most important part of the weapons that we provide is the F-35, which is one of the main jets pummeling Gaza and Lebanon before. Like, that 15% of that's supply. 15% of the supplies for that come from the UK, and so if they'd included that in the weapons licenses, that would have had might have had a detrimental impact on the ability of the Israelis to carry out the genocide. Everything else, obviously, it hasn't had any impact. But the reason they did that, I think, was because there was pressure from activist groups, from the media, about arms. Whenever they talk about British complicity, and that's the wrong word, it's participation, it's always about arms, which obviously is important, and we shouldn't be arming them. There should be a full arms embargo. There should have been one a long, long time ago. But that pressure has had an impact in that, and they felt they had to react because they didn't want to. The Labour Party is so deeply in bed with Israel that, especially the parts of it that are now ruling, like Starmer and Lamy, but they felt they had to because the media was at least mentioning it, and activist groups. If that same pressure had been brought about the stuff I'm talking about the spy team, about the daily spy flights, then they would have had to change policy on that. So the fact that the media has completely dropped the ball on this and censored it from the mainstream makes them complicit, because there's no pressure on the government to stop this. And then obviously the D-Notice itself, the interesting thing about the D-Notice, right, this is a system that's been operating for generations in the UK, which is embarrassing in itself, because what self-respecting journalists goes along to the Ministry of Defence every 6 months and gets told what they can and can't publish. It's against all what you're told journalism is for, but yet they do that. But yet it is officially voluntary. So they send out this notice, but they say they don't say this in the notice, but they say this on their website. There's no enforcement. They can't prosecute you or anything. So these people have shut up about the SAS, the Special Forces role in this genocide and these wanton war crimes daily, voluntarily. Horrific. That's complicity.
And it makes you wonder what they know, the journalists who are kept silent.
Well, I haven't had any. See, the SAS is maybe the element of it that interests me the most, because I know some about their history and how they operate, and they don't mess around. Like, I imagine that we don't know, it's all speculation, but their role could be large and include being on the ground in Gaza. So, and there's very, very few whistleblowers ever from the SAS, but the journalists probably would have heard stuff. Definitely. In fact, that, as I said, someone leaked that to the Sun about the SAS, and I don't think it was an official leak, unusually actually, because usually we do get stuff about the SAS, but it's all carefully curated by the SAS itself. If you read the Daily Mail, they'll be like, this heroic campaign we've heard. But this one obviously maybe wasn't an official leak because they sent a DNATIS out the following day, or at least someone did it in a way that they weren't meant to. They gave maybe more information than they were meant to, because I mean it was presented as a heroic SAS mission, that Sun article, but you imagine, people know within the media, defense correspondents and stuff will know what's been going on. Nothing has come out. So again, we're at the beginning of this in terms of the UK side, UK complicity and participation. It's years of work, and it shouldn't stop now. I think like journalists who are looking at this stuff, and academics as well, we need to understand that we're just at the beginning of this, and we're scratching the surface. We've probably got like 10% of what the reality is, and hopefully when all that information is gathered and put together, we can it will end with the prosecution of the ministers responsible, because this is another important point about the future, and why Gaza will be a turning point, whether that in a good way or a bad way. This will happen again if we allow the people who did it to get away with it. And I'm not talking just about the Israelis. I'm talking about their international sponsors and the international participants like Britain and America. It's a fundamental understanding in our society that if you don't have a system or a punitive system in place to deter criminal activity, it happens again and again. That's what prisons are basically for. Yeah. They're to send a message like, if you do this wrong, you're going to go to prison. So all these politicians that have lived with impunity pretty much forever, if we talk about Western politicians, if this continues, and we're talking about, it's never been as exposed because this is a live stream genocide, the first live stream genocide. If the whole world sees that they get away with it, and they get away with it, and it's normalized, then it's going to happen again. And also, what Israel's tactics and lawlessness will be replicated by other states because they get away with it, and the Western powers that back them allow it. So Gaza, the world could become Gaza. I mean, I think this is what is quite scary for all of us. Outside of just the moral crisis that allowing Gaza to happen is that so many red lines have been crossed, and there's just a feeling I think a lot of us have in our gut that this isn't going to stay in Gaza now. That's so just the wanton disregard for any kind of semblance of law or order or norms. I don't think you can smash it up that badly and so publicly and for so long, and it not to have a long-term impact. Because, I mean, what could you do that's worse than what? I mean, apart from like putting everyone in gas chambers, like, I mean, this is a genocide. It's not a industrialized genocide like that, but they're setting fire to displaced people camps. They're burning people alive who are on IV drips. Like the images that are etched into all our minds. It chills me that we allowed this to happen, and we've had all our leaders backing it. That I just don't think that you can see that, and we can experience this for so long and it not have some deep, profound impact on the future of our world. I mean, there's the amazing doctor, I can't remember her name, Tanya something, and she was in Gaza, and she gave testimony at the UN, and she said, I felt like I was experiencing the end of the world. That's what she said. And that felt like it resonated with me. Obviously I haven't been in Gaza, but I was just like, that's a feeling that I had. I was like, I feel like I'm watching the end of the world and the end of humanity that we allowed.
Definitely the end of the world as we know it.
Yeah, for sure. And obviously that throws up two options. It's like, we can rebuild the world in a better way, or we can rebuild it in the same vein as we've watched. I mean, I don't like to give false optimism. My feeling now is that the balance of power is so heavily stacked on the side of evil that we're in a bit of a tough situation to turn this round. But you never know. I mean, things happen fast. Things can turn around. But it's not a optimistic moment in that respect.